Alors, bonjour à tous. Good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Welcome to the 2021 VictoriaForum webinar series that will lead us to next April, our VictoriaForum on Bridging the Divide. Soyez les bienvenus à cette série de webinaires 2021 qui nous mèneront jusqu'en 2022 avec des discussions périodiques sur des thèmes importants de l'art vers notre forum biannuel sur les questions de combler les clivages. Je m'appelle Sébastien Beaulieu, je suis ambassadeur du Canada au Sénégal et coprésident associé du Forum de Victoria, et il me fait plaisir de vous souhaiter la bienvenue à cette activité aujourd'hui. Nous avons des panélistes passionnés et passionnants. On a bien hâte de les entendre. We have lined up for you very insightful and engaged experts and climate and environmental advocates. That's what you've signed up for, so I'll be very brief in my introduction. We have about 300 registrants for this event. Il y a des gens qui nous rejoignent d'un peu partout dans le monde, sur les 5 continents, pour ce qui promet d'être non seulement une conversation engageante et engagée, mais aussi une conversation globale, parce que les enjeux climatiques nécessitent justement une solution globale. We have 60 minutes ahead of us, so without further ado, I'll turn it over to our moderator, Dr. Sybil Seitzinger, who is professor and executive director of the Pacific Institute for Climate Solutions and a fellow at the American Geophysical Union. Alors, à vous, Sybil, pour une heure passionnante devant nous. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Sebastian, and it's a pleasure to virtually moderate this webinar today. I'd like to start by acknowledging with respect the Lekwungen peoples on whose traditional territory the University of Victoria stands, and the Songhees, Esquimalt, and Wisanic peoples whose historical relationship with the land continues to this day. Many of us on the panel, as well as all of you participants, are meeting in this virtual space, are located outside, of course, of Victoria and across the world. So I would also like to acknowledge the lands on which you live and work. Regardless of where in the world you are located, I think I can say with assurance that we are all looking forward to the post-COVID-19 world. I won't venture to say that we will be out of the woods, or when we will be out of the woods. I will venture to say that we will be, but not when. But I can say with assurance that how we navigate this recovery will have important implications for the near term and longer term for solutions for an even larger crisis, the climate crisis. It's encouraging to see that many governments are already putting climate solutions at the forefront of their COVID recovery plans, and it will take actions from not only governments, but also companies, communities, individuals, financial institutions, environmental organizations, and many more to secure a pathway to a sustainable collective future. So today we have a panel of distinguished experts from the International Monetary Fund, the African Development Bank, and the co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation to discuss their perspectives on how the pathway to the post-pandemic recovery can also support climate change solutions. So after a few housekeeping items, I'll introduce the 3 panelists briefly, who will also then provide opening remarks, 2 or 3 minutes each, before we move into a Q&A session, where I'll pose a few questions to the panelists to get the discussion going. And then we'll have time for the panelists to address some of your questions. So this session is being recorded and will be available to you and others at the VictoriaForum.com within about a week. So watch for that and let others know when that is available so they can also see what has happened today. But for your questions, I want you to know that the chat function is not available. However, we very much welcome you to join the conversation and submit your questions through the Q&A button, which you'll see at the bottom of your screen. You can also vote for questions, which will raise them towards the top of the list. So please engage in that and help to move the conversation forward. So I'd like to now start by introducing our first panelist, Dr. David Suzuki, who many of you know, I'm sure. David is a scientist, a broadcaster, an author, and co-founder of the David Suzuki Foundation. He's a champion of the companion of the Order of Canada and a recipient of UNESCO's Kalinga Prize for Science, the United Nations Environmental Program Medal, and many other awards over the years. I would like to welcome Dr. Suzuki, and also in particular welcome him because he's either just had a major birthday or coming up on one within a few days. So very much welcome you and look forward to your comments.
Merci. Bonjour tout le monde. Je vais parler en anglais, mais excusez-moi. I'm speaking to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Wiwaikai Nation on Quadra Island in British Columbia. I want to share thoughts with you today as a grandfather and as an elder. I have no vested interest in the status quo, and it's my role as a grandfather that is driving me now, and having sifted through a life of experience, and yes, I did celebrate my birthday a couple of days ago. I'm now trying to perform my obligation to share what I've learned as an elder. And what it's crystal clear is that we've run out of time. We can't continue with this incrementalism. You know, after 3 years, we finally have the recognition that Canada can impose, the federal government can impose a carbon tax on the provinces, but starting at a tiny amount. We can't go on with these incremental attempts at change. We need big change. And if I may say, the primary challenge we face is that for most of human history, we understood that our very well-being and our lives depended on a complex web of relationships with all other species, with the sun, with air, water, and soil. That's an ecocentric way of seeing the world. And when you're embedded in a complex web of relationships, you have a reciprocal obligation to receive from that web, but a responsibility to act properly to ensure that it continues on. The shift to anthropocentrism, where we think that we're at the top and everything else is down there for us to use. And even the environmental movement, well, we have to be a little more responsible, but we're existing within an anthropocentric worldview that is really driving or shaping our legal, our economic, and our political structures, so that however much we try to tweak them, we are still fundamentally destructive because we've removed ourselves above the web of life that sustains us. So this is the real challenge, that we have to find a way to reinsert ourselves back into the web of complexity and relationships.
Thank you, Dr. Suzuki, for those opening remarks. And I'm sure that we'll have much more to talk about as the hour progresses. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Balgis Osman Alasha from the African Development Bank, where she is the Chief Climate Change and Green Growth Specialist and Regional Coordinator for the North African Development and Business Delivery Center. Dr. Balgis Osman Alashi has a PhD in forestry and more than 20 years of experience spanning climate change mitigation and adaptation, natural resources management, renewable energy, and green growth, with a special focus on the human dimension of global environmental changes and their impacts on sustainable development. She has many awards, including being a winner of the UNEP Champions of the Earth Award for its outstanding environmental achievements, and awarded the highest achievement medal by the government of Sudan in 2011. And beyond these statistics, from reading about her work, it's clear she is truly a leader and source of inspiration for many in addressing the issues of climate change in Africa, but elsewhere around the world as well. So I would like to now welcome Baljeet.
Thank you very much, Prof. Sibyl, for this very generous introduction, and to the organizers for inviting me to this timely panel. It's a great privilege and to be here virtually, and I appreciate the opportunity. It's very difficult, of course, to speak after Prof. David, but I'll try. And we all know that there are many similarities between the COVID-19 and climate change, and both have presented huge challenges and still, of course, presenting huge challenges to the global community. But for me to put this situation into perspective, allow me just to take two remarks, opening remarks. The first one is that although climate change is now officially became the world committed to address climate change since the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change almost 3 decades, and the world became committed to address issues of mitigation, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, and also to help people adapt to the impacts of climate change through adaptation. But still, we see very little implementation, and much below the expectation. While now, when we speak about the COVID-19, within a period of less than 2 years, you can see the world governments have pledged more than $12 trillion in stimulus spending, and to dig their way out of this coronavirus economic downturn. So this amount by far exceeds the investment that scientists say they need for the next 5 years to avoid catastrophic climate change. And also it is less than the amount required to meet the ambitious goal of Paris Agreement of limiting the global average temperature below 2 degrees centigrade and aiming for 1.5 degrees centigrade. We know also the IPCC did a lot of studies in this regard, and the IPCC found that we need to cut emissions to net zero by 2050 in order to achieve this goal of 1.5 degrees. So what we lack in climate change is this political commitment, which was very evident in dealing with COVID-19. The second point is that it's becoming evident that climate change will bring a wide spectrum of diseases and health problems that can, if we continue to underestimate its impact and also to under-budget climate change, we will be very possible to face similar scenarios like this COVID-19 scenario in the future with many diseases. So what I would say is that we need a similar level of commitment to be directed to responding to climate change, hopefully. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Baljeet. We really look forward to you bringing your perspective even more fully into the discussion as we move forward. And so I'd like now to introduce our third panelist, Dr. Ralph Shami. And Ralph is currently the Associate Director of the Institute for Capacity Development at the International Monetary Fund, where he oversees the development and implementation of the internal economics training program for all IMF economists, as well as revamping the Institute's external training program for officials from member countries. Most recently, he was Assistant Director and Division Chief of the Middle East and Central Asia Department, where he oversaw surveillance and program work on fragile states, including Egypt, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and a number of others. He has also a forthcoming book on the macroeconomic policy in fragile states, and his areas of specialization, as you can see, range from climate, fragile states, remittances, banking regulation and supervision, financial markets, and possibly a little known fact to many of you is that he's also, I understand, a semi-professional guitarist for the past 40 years. So Ralph, over to you for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Sybil. Thank you all for coming and for the invite. I mean, it's difficult to, following David and Balkis, but let me try. I would have liked very much that we all meet together in Victoria to be discussing this. Unfortunately, we're unable to do so. We're all hiding at home, staring at screens because presumably a virus that you can't see in a wet market that probably you'll never visit has almost brought humanity to its knees, caused the death of over 2.6 million people, resulted in a loss of global growth of about 5.5% and rising, and the destitution of millions of people. So if there's a lesson out of this COVID is that nature is macrocritical. But the question is, how did we arrive here? We arrived here because the current paradigm, the current economic paradigm that we have followed has divorced humans from their natural world, has assumed that nature will always be there and that it's limitless and boundless. And somehow we are distinct from nature, natural world from which we came. As a result, you can figure out what the corollary is going to be, is to cut and pollute with impunity. In fact, we developed a very strange behavior towards nature. I call it the extractive view of nature. We only value things when we take them out of nature. We kill trees, we cut down trees, we kill fish, we kill whales, we kill everything that lives, and suddenly it has value when it's dead. But it has no value. It has value, but has no price when it's alive. This paradigm has led us to this situation, dire situation, which we find ourselves in. In my view, this paradigm is defunct and bankrupt. We need a better vision for tomorrow. We need a vision of a better tomorrow where nature is our partner. We need a new paradigm. We need a paradigm shift that looks at nature as the home in which we live. That paradigm is within our reach. We just have to change the way we look at things and value nature when it's alive and well. My presumption or my statement is that once we do so, then that is the paradigm that will deliver prosperity that is shared and that is sustainable. And goes from an extractive view of nature to a regenerative one. I'll stop here.
Great, thank you, Ralph. So with our introductory remarks now, we'd like to move on to some Q&A beyond this. But before that, I want to do just a quick reminder. First of all, to thank our panelists again for joining us in the upcoming conversation, as well as everyone who is online here. But just to remind you that the chat function's not available, but the Q&A button is, and we very much encourage you to submit your questions and to vote for those questions that you find most interesting to hear from our panelists about. And if those of you who are just joining us, this session is being recorded and will be available at the VictoriaForum.com within about a week. So now I'd like to begin the next section of this webinar with a few questions that I'll pose, but also again looking forward to the questions that we want you to be listing in the Q&A area. So we've heard some overall comments now from all three of you, but now I'd like to drill down a little bit more into some specifics, and some specifics on some of the possible pathways for sustainable recovery pathways from COVID-19. Okay, you've given us some overall ideas, but I'd like you, if we could, to have each of you give us a little bit more specificity on what you think these recovery pathways might look like and how we might motivate to get on those pathways. So I'll start with you, Balkis, if I could.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, as we know that COVID-19 came in the middle of climate change crisis that is causing global concern. And we have been witnessing, the world have witnessed climate change related extremes during the last few decades. We have witnessed heat waves, fire, we witnessed also floods and storms. So there are it exposed a lot of vulnerabilities. And then came the COVID-19 and exposed another layer of vulnerability, completely changing the people's livelihood, economy, and created new realities. So we can see that we are all vulnerable, but at different levels of vulnerability. In the scale of vulnerability, we are at different levels. So the best sustainable recovery path will be the one that will address these combined or multiple layers of vulnerabilities. When I was preparing for this discussion, I came across a study developed in collaboration between John Hopkins Center for Health Security and others. The study explored the global health security capabilities in 195 countries, including high-income countries, using Global Health Security Index and listing countries based on their preparedness for the epidemic or pandemic. And the study showed that collectively, international preparedness for epidemics and pandemics remain very weak, that there are severe weaknesses associated with the abilities to detect, to prevent, and to respond to emergencies. And also, it showed that this reflects severe gaps in health systems, vulnerabilities to political, socioeconomic, and environmental risk that can undermine any preparedness or response capacities. So, as I mentioned before, this calls for the international community to be more proactive and to commit to preparedness rather than a response after the crisis, and also to work in a more collaborative way. We need to prioritize solutions that are comprehensive, sustainable, inclusive, synergistic, and cost-effective. So we need to ensure that the dollar that we will spend to address COVID-19 should also address issues related to climate change impacts. The second reality that came from this COVID-19 is that we identify that COVID-19 is a global concern, because being a pandemic, of course, and as much as the recovery response should take this fact into consideration, but it should be based on national circumstances, priorities, and agenda, because there is no single green pathway that fits all, and should be followed by all. So that we have to tailor our solutions. And this underlines the role of national institutions in developing policies and orchestrating national plans and actions that will ensure preparedness and resilience building. And that means that we should have global support system for enhanced local action. And we also need to not to underestimate the value of the accumulated knowledge, national or traditional knowledge from previous exposure to crisis and disasters. Regions like the Great Horn of Africa has been going through a number of disasters for decades. And many societies have managed to develop coping mechanisms that are still helping them to survive crisis with minimum support from and interference from the global community. These knowledge systems should be perceived as the foundation for all efforts aiming to enhance local resilience and adaptation. And of course, coupled with development in the infrastructure, sustainable development of infrastructure, health care systems, clean and renewable energy, job creations, and extra. So, etc. Yeah, thank you.
Baljees, that's a lot. That's a lot of thoughts there and a lot of important points there. I think we'll come back to some of those in terms of how do we actually get action on these, given that many of these things we have been saying for decades now. So how do we move from where we are today to actually getting that action going? The very important points that you've pointed out there. And from here, I'll move to David and ask, David, would you like to respond to anything that Baljees has said, and or to give your insights into what you would tell the younger generation today if you were starting, or if you were starting out your illustrious career right now as a youth? what advice would you give, or what pathways would you see could be productive and actually lead to action based on the knowledge that you've accumulated over the past several years?
You know, because of the COVID crisis, we've forgotten that it was just a year and a half ago when Greta Thunberg had sparked this amazing movement. I mean, she had an impact that was greater than all other environmentalists put together. I like to think that we helped prepare the scene for her to have her impact, but there's just no question. And when I met her the first time, I said, I am so sorry. This should not be your job. I mean, parents have to be eco-warriors on your behalf. You're supposed to be going out and learning about the world and finding what you love, your joys, and meeting new people. And, you know, that's leading campaigns to fight for your future. My God, that's not your job. And so thank goodness she did it. But we must not forget that strong message. And the question is, what is the crisis? We are faced with an absolutely unprecedented situation. As a biologist, I look at ourselves as a species. We're a basic, upright, two-legged, furless ape that evolved in Africa. And for 95% of our existence, we were nomadic hunter-gatherers, following animals and plants through the seasons on their migrations. We understood profoundly that we are utterly dependent. Thank you, Ralph, for your opening remarks. And because I wish you had been the head of the IMF for 20 years. They need to get that message. We've understood for most of human existence that it was Mother Earth, Turtle Island, you know, that gave us our lives and our well-being. And so in our ceremonies and our prayers and songs, we celebrated that place in nature, and in ceremony, we acknowledged a reciprocal responsibility to act properly to keep it all going. In an anthropocentric world where we think we're at the head, we're so smart, we don't have to pay any attention to natural law because we can, you know, we're so smart, we can travel faster than the speed of sound, we can live in outer space and escape gravity. Wow, we don't have to pay attention to nature's laws. And so we've designed legal systems, economic and political systems, all based on our anthropocentrism. That's all about us. Now, Partha Dasgupta recently came out with a report in the UK showing what a stupid, crazy economic system it is when you don't include all of the things that nature does that keeps the planet habitable for all life, including us. And we developed the economic system based on the creed of cancer cells. You know, cancer cells think they can grow indefinitely. Well, nothing in a finite world can grow indefinitely. And yet economics, the very measure of success of economics today, seems to be how well you've grown in the past year. And so I think that, you know, our political system, my God, what a screwed up system that is, where we elect people to lead us into the future. And the future is all based on, I've got to do everything to get reelected. And they get reelected by voters. But the people most profoundly impacted by what they do or do not do, namely children, future generations, the ocean, the air, the forests, they don't vote. And they're not on the agenda. So the challenge is to get the hell off these crazy systems that we've developed to regulate and modulate our own behavior and reinsert ourselves back into an ecocentric way of living. I just want to illustrate this for Ralph. Someone sent me a cartoon, and in the cartoon, the caption was the executive CEO telling his executives, and so while the end of the world scenario will be rife with unimaginable horrors, we believe that the pre-end period will be filled with unprecedented opportunities for profit. And it's true. We've seen the fossil fuel industry, which has known that climate change is happening, that burning fossil fuels is causing it. They've known since the 1960s. This is real. And they chose to take the opportunities for profit. So the system itself is designed. You can tinker with these systems, but the systems are driving our destructiveness. The good news is there are still people who can guide us into an ecocentric way of seeing the world. And those are indigenous people around the world. Their battles for their territory is not only because they know that their well-being depends on the land, but they're driven by a need to act in the proper way to protect that, the territory that's being taken over by the dominant societies.
Thank you, David. Thank you for those inspiring remarks there. And I'm going to turn it over now to Ralph to take a few minutes to respond to what you've heard, as well as to bring forward your own perspective here on the pathways to sustainability in the post-COVID world.
Sybil, you mean to applaud what I just heard? To applaud?
Yes, please.
I can't thank you both enough. Okay, let me. I'm a financial economist. I am not an environmental economist. I came into the climate work by sheer accident. Studying, I was on a boat in the Sea of Cortez, studying the blue whale with a bunch of experts, and I discovered something that was changed my life about 4 years ago. But let me take one step back. You know, I think it was Einstein who said once, it's sheer lunacy to repeat the same mistake and expect a different outcome. If we are going to start tomorrow as we lived yesterday, it's not only sheer lunacy, it's suicide. Because if you truly believe, if we are here because we believe that the climate crisis is upon us in 2050, by the way, people don't understand 2050 is a date in time. And time is dynamic, and time is a train coming at you at a very high speed. So if you're not taking actions yesterday or the day before, that 2050 is 2040, 2030. Pretty soon, may as well just give up. But let me be more positive here. We all know, as an economist, I know that there's a positive link between growth and pollution. And after all, that's what we did. We sold into this, we bought into this growth equation at any cost, because we are in love with ourselves. We call it in the US navel gazing. We thought we are it, and so we pursued growth at any cost, because we somehow, I think it started with the Cartesian paradigm and the age of enlightenment, or so-called enlightenment, where the human was the master of the universe, master of the beast, to tame nature, as we're discovering right now, this virus, tiny little virus that you can't even see, it's tamed all of us, all billions of us. But let me go from here. And we just basically assumed without any proof that nature is limitless, boundless, to be killed, to be destroyed, to be abused with impunity. Now, and we pursued a growth equation. So what happens? Every time you grow, you're producing carbon, producing all kinds of emissions. Okay, and we talk about what we're going to do about it. But guess what? With this calamity, you have on top of it COVID. COVID came in, caused all of our economies to tank. And now guess what? All of the governments of the world are now thinking how to restart the economy. What do you mean restart the economy? If we restart the economy with the same approach as we had before, that means everybody's gunning their engines to start growing again, which means more pollution. And how are we going to go to carbon zero? So there is a solution to this. The solution is the following. I am a market economist. I'm a trained neoclassical economist. I started in physics, actually. I taught graduate students. I practiced it for 23 years and some. The fallacy is that we assigned a price of zero to nature. That's what Partha is saying in his report. Nature has value to us. How do we know that? It's very simple. I discovered that the science, Andy Pershing 2010 paper, Joe Roman 2014, Lavery 2017, and so others, that whales, the great whales, sequester carbon in their bodies, and through the whale pump help to sequester carbon in the phytoplankton. Interested in this discovery that I thought I was an educated person, had no idea about, I told my colleague scientists, I said, how about if I value for you the value of the whale in terms of carbon sequestration? We embarked on this in 2019. We showed that one whale's carbon services alone, if I take the carbon that the whales sequester on their bodies and indirectly, is worth about 2 million to 3 million, depending on the size of the whale. a live whale. Now imagine what is the value of the price of a live whale today? Zero. If a ship hits a whale today, it pays zero. But kill a whale, cut it into pieces, feed it to some people that eat it, it fetches $80,000 dead. So the value is in a dead whale. The same thing, 2019, Fabio Berzaghi called me from Paris, said, hey, you valued the whale services. I and the scientists in the laboratory in Paris discovered that forest elephants help to capture carbon in the forest. They increase it by 7% in above ground carbon. He said, can you value that one? Long story short, we valued that service at $1.75 million per forest elephant. By the way, 2 days ago, they declared them on the extinct group, if you've seen that IUCN report, just came out. But a live elephant in the forests, in the jungles of Africa, the price of it is zero. In our market system, if you have a price of zero, you have no voice. So nature has had no voice. Unless we recognize its value in a pricing system, it will always be an externality. How can the house in which you live in be external to you? I don't understand it. So if you tell me a solution is bringing nature back into the economic equation, into the equation of life from which we came from. I'll stop here.
So I see David shaking his head now.
I think it's subordinating economics to the natural world. Now, I mean, the whole idea of trying to justify saving live whales because they're worth money to it, that's just crazy. Let
me clarify, David. Let me clarify something. I am not talking about value of a whale. I'm saying the whale has been working for you for free. I work for the IMF. The IMF pays me a salary. The whale has been working for us, saving us for free. In fact, worse, he has a negative price, meaning when you kill him, he acquires a price. I'm saying, why don't you recognize his value to you?
Okay, I see that Baljeet might want to respond to this, as well as David, maybe come back to him on this, and then we'll move on to another question. So Baljeet, did you want to say something with respect to what Ralph has been proposing?
Yeah, actually I agree with Ralph that as long as we don't have this monetary value for nature, we continue to use them like they are there forever and they are worthless. And that is why we are in this situation in which we are now, because it's very cheap to cut trees. It's very cheap to kill animals and for example, elephants, and to get just their teeth, things like that. So it's valuing the ecosystem services is key to its conservation. The forest ecosystem provide filter water, filter air, provide carbon sequestration, and all these many other things, biodiversity. Yeah, but it has never been really valued, and that is why now the call for ecosystem services.
Okay, I'm going to give David the last comment on this, and then we'll move on to another question. David, did you have anything else you want to say on this?
Just say to Baljeet, it's always been acknowledged. It's understood by traditional people for most of our existence. We didn't have to understand what role they played within the ecosystems of the planet. We just valued them. And the way the indigenous people I work with, they see all life as our biological relatives. They refer to the green relatives, to the four-leggeds and the two-leggeds and the winged ones as our relatives. And that means you deal with them in a radically different way. But it is true. I mean, I think what Partha has done with his book that tells you all of the ecosystem services nature performs, of course, that has to be brought into it. But I think ultimately we have to acknowledge the spiritual value of things. We can't just measure it in monetary terms.
Mm-hmm. Great. So I'm going to move the conversation now to something else, which relates to some of the questions we see coming in, which is, and I'll start with Baljeet on this, which is, what role do you see the African Development Bank having in this recovery from the in a post-pandemic world, and also as it relates and specifically to climate solutions. So, what is the role of the African Development Bank?
The African Development Bank, the Multilateral Development Bank, is committed to help regional member countries in Africa to achieve their commitments to, like, Paris Agreement and other related conventions. So the bank is helping countries develop and implement their national strategies. Like climate change is there is no other issue that have been like going on and strategies, action plan being developed around like climate change. So the problem is the implementation. And the implementation because of lack of the means of implementation, which should have been part of the commitment, but it has not really been effective. So what is needed is the knowledge, the capacity, the technology, the finance, and all other means of implementation. The bank is trying to help countries with accessing resources, financial resources, from internal resources of the bank, and also supporting countries improve their capacity to access climate finance. We have the Green Climate Fund, we have the JEF, we have many funds that is allocating climate finance, but it's not easy for African countries to access these resources because of the modality and the level of capacity needed. So the bank is an accredited entity for these funds, and it's helping, it's managing resources on behalf of the African countries. The bank is also generating knowledge. It's a knowledge bank, so it's generating knowledge related to the implementation and decision making, to support the decision making in the countries to implement these conventions. It's also building the capacity, the needed capacity, and providing platforms for coordination, because it's very important to coordinate and to not to duplicate efforts. So we have a nationally determined distribution. This is the NDCs, national NDC. We have a NDC hub, Africa NDC hub within the bank, which provide for coordination and improve communication, and also supporting capacity building to access resources.
Okay, great. Thank you. David, I want to turn to you here and ask, we have a number of questions coming in about the need for actual action. How do we move from saying all the things that we think need to be done? We know what we think needs to be done, but how do we actually move to action?
Well, I think that's what Greta did. Of course, there corporations.
But we only have one Greta.
Yeah, but corporations and governments love to say, well, it's up to the individual consumers. If you don't like what business is doing, well, you can shape that by your consumption habits, what you buy or don't buy. Always kind of offloading responsibility onto individuals. But we need big steps taken now, big steps that individuals can't. And so what's the challenge now in Canada? I don't know about other governments. We've got to become eco-activists in politics. We have to take a much more active role, and we have to say, look, it doesn't matter what party, if you're going to offer yourself for candidacy, I will only vote for you if you put climate and species extinction at the top of your agenda and you promise you're going to work on that. We've got to make it work. We've got an election coming up very soon. We can't go on with this business where climate and species extinction is kind of a special interest. Environmentalists, they get shunted off to the environment minister as if, there are no implications for the rest of of the other portfolios. This is crazy. So I say right now in Canada, our highest priority is you got to be active in the political system and exert that influence on all candidates that are running for office.
Great. Thanks for that very clear message. Clear message to everyone. And so a final question before we move into closing remarks, actually, the time has gone by very fast, is for you, Ralph, and relates to the IMF. And this question has risen to the top from the audience, from your audience. And it's that the IMF has different meanings to the various sectors the IMF has in its purview. Do your IMF colleagues agree with your important remarks on shifting the paradigm?
Well, the quick answer to this is I would invite you to go to the website of the Paulson Institute and take a look at the video where the managing director of the IMF is on the same panel with Hank Paulson and Gillian Tett from the FT and the head of the IDB. And why don't you listen to her talking about how the IMF is proud to be looking at the impact of whales on carbon sequestration and the valuation of the effort. I would like to underwrite something here that is very important. Life, as the natives have always realized, is intrinsically invaluable. I am not talking about the value of life. I'm talking about value of ecosystem services. Because short of changing our economic paradigm is market-based. If you want to throw it out, that's fine. But the question is, in the meantime, until we do so, we have kept out of the equation, I call them the what's in it for me crowd. That's the crowd that has the money, the resources, the power to make the decision. We have shunned them out. We have called them all kinds of names. And then the converts among us have had a conversation. Nature is important. Yes, nature is important. Yes, this. And then we kind of look at each other and we do high fives and go home. And guess who's making the decision? The person with the money, with the power, that is completely out of this equation. So when I decided to enter this, I was talking to my crowd. I was talking to what's in it for me crowd. I was telling them, if you don't care about the whale, if you don't care about the elephant, if you don't care about the salt marshes, seagrass, guess what? You should care about, they are looking after you. So even if you don't care for them intrinsically, they are saving you. And since you are so selfish that you care about yourself, you should care about them. So the valuation was to basically translate the language of science into the language that us in the financial markets understand. Because I truly believe if you want to solve this problem, and this problem is upon us, you need everybody inside the tent. We cannot demonize anybody. Solutions come, everybody inside the tent. We hold hands and with different languages to different audiences, but with the same purpose. We are part of this nature. This nature is our home. Now, you may understand it in one way through the ethics. Somebody understand it through the dollars. It doesn't matter as long as we all understand. Now, but once you do that, I just want to finish
Ralph,
with that.
We only have a couple minutes left and we have closing remarks. You'll have a minute for your closing remarks. And so as much as I would like to continue this conversation, we're running out of time. So I'd like each of the panelists, and we'll start with Baljeet, to just take a minute to summarize your thoughts or what you would like to leave the participants in today's webinar with as they move out into the world to help address climate change, hopefully. Thank you. Baljeet?
Okay, thank you. I have only three brief remarks. First, we're already seeing lots of complaints that COVID-19 has channeled and shifted resources away from climate change. It's true, but it is important that this should not be used as an excuse to abandon or slow down global collective efforts to address climate change. It should be seen as an opportunity to build on the momentum and accelerate these efforts. This is key. The second point is that it is evident that both climate change and COVID-19 know no boundaries. COVID-19 not only doesn't know boundaries, but it actually set new boundaries and restrictions, which goes down to the household levels or between family members, forcing them to adapt to a new lifestyle. And people before, they don't like to change their lifestyle. When we were speaking on climate change, the need to change the lifestyle, to change the consumption habits, people think it's very difficult, but now we can see that we can. So one way to address all environmental problems is to change human behavior toward the environment or the nature. And this is now evident. We can change. If we have the will, then there is a way. Lastly, it's also good that we are having this conversation about building back better and the green recovery. And it's not, everyone now is talking about that. We are still focusing on what to do. And I think it's high time that we think about the time frame, because time is of essence. We need to know when to do what and in this recovery process and at what cost. And then to tailor, to find also where, because as I mentioned, we need tailored solution to national circumstances and priorities. So if we take like Africa, our solutions should also speak to chronic issues, to poverty, to conflict resolution, to peace building, so that we can say we are having a green recovery that is sustainable and resilient. Thank you.
Thank you, Baljeet. Ralph, I'm going to turn it to you for 1 to 2 minutes at the most, and then I'll give David closing the last say here.
Thank you. I would say this, nature has stood by us and for us since time immemorial. Life is about giving and taking. It's now time for us to stand by nature. Only when we stand by nature will nature continue to stand by us. That's it.
Great. Thank you, Ralph. And David, over to you for the final remarks from today.
Well, my values were really shaped by my mother and father, who married during the Great Depression. And because of the Great Depression, they pounded into my head, live within your means, save some for tomorrow, share, don't be greedy, help your neighbors, they're a part of our community. And the most important lesson they just banged home is you have to work hard to buy the necessities in life, but you don't run after money as if having more money or fancy clothes or a big car or a huge house makes you a better, more important person. That just causes other people to be envious or angry. Those values, I think, are really critical in the way that we live. And I think about necessities. What are necessities? Well, I see our necessities defined as we were for 95% of our lives as nomadic hunter-gatherers, and when I go into a Walmart's, I've only ever gone into one once, the vast bulk of what's in Walmart's is great success in corporations would never be what I would call necessity. And that's our problem, is that we have now got hooked on the idea that, consumption is 70% of the economy in North America. And most of it has nothing to do with necessities. We're consuming the planet to death. I know Baljeet thinks, we've got to get people to change attitude. That is so hard. That's the biggest challenge of all. And I think in order to get those changes, we need laws. We need laws and ways to rein in the destructive agents. Waiting for people to change their attitudes is going to take too long. As Ralph says, what we do now is going to reverberate for years, and we're already into overshoot. We've shot over the carrying capacity of the planet for us.
Great. Thank you, David, for those very important and concluding remarks here. And so I want to thank all three of our panelists today, as well as those behind the scenes who have organized this, for your very important thoughts, your insights, your messages, and your passion. And so for now, we'll have to leave this where we are. We've gotten numerous additional questions that have come in from the audience, which we unfortunately won't have time to address. But thank everyone who has submitted your questions or voted for questions and who have really just joined us here today in this conversation. And I'll turn it back now to you, Sebastian.
Thank you so much, Sybil, for steering what has been a great conversation and making the most of these 60 minutes with our great panelists. Merci, David. Merci, Baljeet. Merci, Ralph. You've been great and certainly provided what we pride ourselves in at the VictoriaForum with calls to action. Vous nous avez donné des matières à réflexion, vous nous avez appelé à l'action et puis nos participants, je crois, se sont régalés de vous entendre et sortent de cette conversation dynamisée et prêts à faire leur différence. I'd like to thank everyone for staying on. Right after this, there will be a short survey for you to fill. We love your feedback, and we're looking to continuously improve our webinar series. I'd like to announce our next webinar, which will take place Thursday, May 6th. We've made it easy for you. It's every first Thursday of the month. We hold one of these fascinating conversations. On vous facilite la tâche, marquez-le à votre agenda le 6 mai. A conversation around the Gustafson Brand Trust Index. We'll be presenting the 2021 results. It's a partnership between the VictoriaForum and the Gustafson School of Business, as well as the Canadian Marketing Association. Trust is important when they build back better, but also around the theme of the VictoriaForum, which is bridging divides, and trust is one of our pillars. Alors, rendez-vous le 6 mai pour un partenariat entre le Forum de Victoria, le Gustafson School of Business et le Canadian Marketing Association, au cours duquel on vous présentera le Gustafson Brand Trust Index, qui est au cœur de nos débats, de nos échanges autour de combler les divisions et puis build back better, si vous me permettez l'expression. Merci à tous et à très bientôt. Merci à TELUS et à Vansili qui sont nos partenaires fondateurs, et le Forum de Victoria vous est présenté à la fois par l'Université de Victoria et le Sénat du Canada. A proud presentation of the VictoriaForum is brought to you by Senate of Canada as well as the VictoriaForum. Merci beaucoup. À très bientôt. Au revoir.